So I don't know if this is a question for, I don't know who, I'll just make it as a statement. If anybody wants to respond, that's fine. But I think there is, based on what I've heard here tonight, one misconception, and that is if the city chooses to do nothing tonight and allow the city's current interpretation of what that ordinance means to stand, that everyone will be paid a Davis-Bacon minimum wage. And I don't believe that's the case. There's another alternative. There's another alternative, and that is that depending on how the numbers work out, White Lodging could choose not to accept the fee waivers at all, in which case the prevailing wage will not apply, period. The minimum floor, which has been offered of $11 prevailing wage, living wage, will not necessarily be in. So you may be laboring under that misunderstanding that the prevailing wage is going to be in place, and that's not necessarily the case if this ordinance is not amended per one of the alternatives that are outlined. That's just a choice. I think you should ask yourself that question. Am I willing to potentially have the lowest paid workers go from $12 an hour back to $7.50 an hour? Because that's what could happen under this potential action. All right.
Mayor.
Councilman Martinez.
Thanks, Mayor. I think just to add to the point that you're making, no one's making $7.25 an hour on this site as it is. I think if that were to happen, they would lose a lot of their workforce because there's employment in the industry and in the market here that would pay them, what the market wage is in Austin. So I think that fear will not be founded, but I just wanted to make that point. I'm not going to sit here and point to all the mistakes that were made. I believe it's up to each individual to own their mistakes. So I'm going to speak to the mistakes that I made, that I believe are mistakes. But it doesn't change my intentions. 2 years ago, we had this before us. And I think the mistake that I made was that I put an amendment on that I really didn't know the full ramifications of what that would mean. But 5 other council members also agreed to add that amendment. My testimony was clear. It was asked of us that night to approve it on all 3 readings. It had to be done. The market was right. Commodities were cheap. We were in a recession. We need to go now. We need to go now. And I just said, great, I'm happy to support this project. I'm happy to support it and let it go now on all 3 readings. But there are 2 community benefits that I believe are important. And so in order for me to support it tonight on all 3 readings, I would like to offer an amendment to apply prevailing wage and the intent of the city's MBEWB ordinance. And I appreciate Ms. Haynes' information that she provided us that, they are on target to meet their goals. I take her for a word. But my intent was clear that night. It was nothing other than, if we're going to move forward, prevailing wage must apply as well as the MBEWB ordinance. Now, should I have known the impact? Probably so. But when you look through the testimony, and we started on that line of testimony, it was specifically asked after the answer from White Lodging of yes, we have used prevailing wage, it was specifically asked, what has been the impact on those projects? Is it 20, 30, or 40%? White Lodging replied, no, 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 not anything like that. It's 5 to 10%. So he was pretty spot on because a $300 million project at 10% is $3 million. They're projecting it's going to be about $4 million for prevailing wage. So at that point, The information was out there. The representative of White Lodging said to us about 5 to 10%. Didn't say, but I'd like to go verify that. But I'd like to really know what that answer is. Can you give this time? Just said it'd be 5 to 10%. And so we moved forward on all 3 readings that night. And that's what's put us in a mess, and I'll categorize it as that. It's been a 2-year mess. But all of that aside, it doesn't change the intent 1 ounce. The intent was to apply those 2 provisions should the fee waivers apply. And so I don't see how I can change that position today, even though it may have wiped out the fee waivers. I mean, I understand that is a bad consequence. And in my testimony, I actually even said that I realize this may cause some obstacles, an obstacle or 2, but I can only support this tonight if we add these 2 provisions. And we moved forward, and we added those provisions. And so, I'm going to stick with my intentions from 2 years ago. I think, and the sad part is, the mayor is, I somewhat agree with him, nobody's going to win. Prevailing wage is not going to be applied. White Lodging and the folks that are supporting White Lodging are, not going to feel good about doing business with Austin. We're not going to establish a precedent about what values apply necessarily. We're going to establish a precedent that, we took it to White Lodging on this one. But I think that speaks to why we need to have clear rules in place and why we still need work on the economic incentives agreement that really is not related to this. This is a fee waiver, but the issues are very similar in that whenever the private sector is coming to the government to ask for assistance, that the government gets to impart some things upon them. The government gets to say, fine, you can ask for it, and we will consider it. But you also have to provide some things in return. Some of those are domestic partner benefits. Some of those are a wage floor. Some of those are prevailing wages. But those aren't codified yet. We're working on that. It's supposed to come to council very soon. And this is a clear example of why we need those policies in place before we start making these one-off decisions, because we end up in situations like this. So my intention, please, thank you. My intentions are to stick with what the position I took 2 years ago, but to get to work immediately on the pending economic incentives agreement. Because one of the things that we repeatedly hear from the business community is, we understand sometimes you have to change the rules. Just tell us what the rules are so we can stick to them. Well, we need to make those rules crystal clear moving forward so that we can spend our Thursday nights arguing about zoning rather than a fee waiver case.